Law enforcement of Reddit, what was the most scary / paranormal call you have responded to? Late evening maybe a decade ago, I ended up running silent to a call with additional units in tow. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor when she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced, no kids, and had no expected company. She is outside across the street when we arrive, obviously unnerved and being calmed by her neighbor. Other units showed up almost as I did and set up a perimeter at the corners of the property. We talk with her, get permission to enter, so we decide we'll announce ourselves and clear the house. 3 of us stack up on the front door, announce and make entry, while the other officers are viewing the windows from a distance under concealment. She was in the midst of making a really late dinner, so the house smells really good. I remember how good it smelled. Anyway, we clear the ground level and make our way to the stairs when we hear it. Obviously footsteps on the wood floors above us. Not a panicky oh shit I'm caught footsteps and running to hide or escape. No, these were calm, methodic and almost pace-like. We announce ourselves again and no response, except the pacing just starts to sort of fade away. Quietly I make my way up the steps, adrenaline pumping and concentrating on pieing the corner at the top. I stop a few stairs shy of the corner, breathe, and proceed up. The hallway at the top was pitch black, and after successfully clearing the top corner we make our way down the hallway clearing rooms. Nothing. Nobody. Not even a critter. Not that any critter would ever make what I describe as human footsteps on hardwood. After the initial search, a few of the other officers involved also checked every nook and cranny, bed, closet, rack, hell, even the washer, dryer, appliances, and cupboards were thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of order. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Eventually we invite the lady back into her residence and reassure her that there was nobody in there, and we equated her noise to maybe wood shrinkage or expansion in the home. None of the officers outside and after our initial search had seen anybody leave the top or bottom floors or windows. The house had no indications that anybody tried to force open a window or door. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes once the other officers cleared the call and waited while her friend showed up to stay the night with her. I went over basic security measures with her and double checked all her windows and doors were not compromised. She fed me well done lasagna as I waited, and to this day, I'm convinced that I interacted with another dimension of life that day. One time I was alone in the evening in my parents' house. They were away, and I heard a scraping / grinding sound from the ground floor bedroom. The door was closed at the time. It almost sounded like glass being cut, or maybe a scream. It continued off and on for a few minutes. I was terrified. I ran upstairs and called a nearby friend of mine, who was willing to drive into my driveway from which the room window could be seen. I didn't call the police because I was afraid that maybe there was nothing happening and they would think it's silly. There were no trees nearby that could cause this scraping / cutting sound. My friend pulls up, sees nothing, and knocks on the door. We go into the room together. There is nothing amiss. No one in the room, no signs of entry. Walking back out of the bedroom, we found the cause of the sound. The concrete foundation of the house had started to shift and was causing the tile floor to buckle. We had a good laugh, but I thought it was pretty scary when it happened. About 4 years ago, a lady who I'll call Lucy called on an emergency line and said she locked herself out of her house. I responded to take the report in case FD needed to force entry. I arrived first and immediately noticed a burning candle and some Jesusi statues in the upstairs window. The light in this room was also on. I can't explain it, but it seemed a bit odd to me. Anyways, I approached Lucy, who appeared to be about 65 years old, and asked what happened. She said she walked to her car to get groceries for her and her mother, but forgot her keys inside, and the door had locked behind her. I asked if her mother was home, and Lucy replied in the affirmative. Lucy went on to say she technically lived alone because her mom died 6 years prior, but she still lives with her in the bedroom with the lit candle and makes her presence known by turning on / off lights, opening / closing doors, and turning on the bathroom faucet. I then walked the perimeter of the home and found an unlocked window into the kitchen. Since Lucy never actually left home and knew no one else was inside, I radioed dispatch and climbed in through the window with her consent. As my boot touched the kitchen floor, I heard an audible click. At the same time, the lights in the stairway and upstairs hallway to my left turned off. I quickly walked to the rear sliding door to my right and advised Lucy what had happened. Lucy laughed and said that was just her mom saying hello. I told Lucy that, although I genuinely believe what she told me was true, I still had to do my due diligence and ensure no one else was inside. I radioed for a back, and within minutes my buddy arrived. The first thing he asked about was the lit candle in the window. While clearing the upstairs, we came upon the room where the candle was and immediately noticed it was blown out. There were no open windows, fans, vents, or other obvious source that could extinguish the flame. We just looked at each other with a bit of unease and went back downstairs to leave. The upstairs lights turned off behind us. We talked to Lucy for another 5 minutes and suggested getting a battery operated candle just to be safe. Well, Lucy clearly thought fuck the police, because to this day, that candle burns in the open window most nights when I drive by. And every now and then I'll stop and talk to Lucy to see how she and her mother are doing. I worked at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton in 2013. I was part of the transition team that moved the last of the belongings that they wanted from their old location to their new one. Along with others on my team, we were part of the final sweep as far as cleaning up, waxing the floors, and locking up some of the higher level rooms within the old hospital. It was a nice gig, because there was a ton of office supplies that was going to just get thrown away along with some office chairs. I like to draw, so I took home 2 chairs, one for me and one for my roommate, along with a plethora of pens and paper. In my duty section there was also the security role of watching over the barracks that was just outside of the hospital. With the Navy being the Navy, they didn't transfer anyone over to the new barracks till about a full 8 months after the move to the new hospital. So someone still had to stand duty there as well as patrol the old hospital as to keep away any would-be vandals from a place they thought was completely abandoned. Of course I would end up getting duty one day and would start getting people coming into the commons area telling to go look at the hospital. There was very clearly a light on in 6th or 7th floor with a figure standing motionless watching outside. I put up a sign to say that I would be leaving the office and to call my personal number should they need anything. Usually it was just to reset their keycards, but each room had 4 rooms within it, so usually people just called their roommates to open the doors instead of waiting for the process of me resetting their keycard. It was already pretty late at night, so I wasn't worried about it. I would go to the hospital, and it was still completely locked all around. I checked to make sure that no windows were ajar, but the hospital didn't have any that opened. I even tried to lift the back hatch that linens and new supplies came through by truck and that was still secured. I had no other way of getting in myself, so when my chief came down around 2 AM, as they seldomly did, but were required to at least once a night, I made a report of it. By this time the figure was gone, but the light remained on. I was never told if they ever found anyone, or if it was even followed up on for that matter. But it was one of the creepiest things I remember from being there. I've been in law enforcement for several years now. I serve a small rural town. During the summer of 2015, I had one of my most unsettling experiences. That evening my partner and I were called to investigate a potential trespasser on some residential property out in the sticks. A young girl, about 15 or 16 years old, had called 911 and reported that a person wearing a clown costume was loitering around her backyard. I'll refer to her as Sarah. She was extremely frightened when we arrived. Her mother had to work late that night, so Sarah was home alone. She explained that a tall person in a clown costume had repeatedly emerged from the woods in her backyard. She first saw him when she went to let her dog out. He was peering at her from behind a tree, beckoning her to come over. I could hear him laughing, she said. She ran inside with her pet, locked the door, and immediately called 911. She watched from a window as the clown reappeared several times from the woods, exhibiting erratic behavior. She described the clown's appearance as really scary, not at all like the silly, colorful characters typically seen. He had a quintessential red nose, but wore a dark colored jumpsuit. She thought his face was painted white with dark shapes around his eyes. No hair or head accessories, according to her. After investigating inside the home, We checked the perimeter of the house. My partner stayed behind to monitor the doors while I approached the tree line. No sooner than I shined my flashlight into the woods that I heard the sounds of snapping tree limbs, as if someone was walking through the forest about 20 yards away. I called out, announcing myself as a police officer. No response, no more sounds. Not sure what we were dealing with, we did not venture into the woods. It was the middle of the night with limited visibility. I focused my attention on investigating the property for anything suspicious, while my partner patrolled around the house. Nothing of interest was found. Over the next couple of months, our department received several more calls about clown sightings. Not only did these sightings occur within a 5-mile radius of each other, but all of them were reported by young people. Because it's a small community, we initially thought this was all some kind of prank/hoax orchestrated by a bunch of bored kids. These kids, however, seemed genuinely frightened upon investigation and their descriptions were consistent. We really didn't know what to think. No one or nothing was ever found in these cases, with the exception of one. Around sunset one evening, we received a phone call from an elderly woman I'll call Helen. She was a sweet lady who played the organ at a church in town. Although she was devoutly religious, like the kind of person who'd quote scripture in the middle of a conversation, she meant well. Anyways, Helen called and said that her grandson, whom she was raising, saw a clown in their yard. She was concerned and wanted the police to investigate. Her grandson was only 5, and getting details out of him proved difficult. In a rather matter-of-fact kind of way, Helen said, "Officer, those clowns are devil worshippers. I know it, because right after my grandson saw that clown, my mother's nutcracker, that one right there on top of the fireplace, fell and broke. I've been praying hard ever since." Sure enough, her nutcracker was broken into 2 pieces. I did an internal eye roll and redirected the conversation. "Let me walk outside and check things out," I said. Helen followed behind me as we walked out the back door. Everything was still and quiet. I asked if there were any places on the property where someone could hide. She said there was an old, overgrown shed about 100 yards behind her house. I radioed him for support, and another officer arrived soon after. Thankfully it was a lightly wooded area, so the shed was easy enough to find. It was quite dilapidated and half falling down. The door was slightly ajar. We called out but there wasn't a response. We had flashlights in our left hands and our right hands on our weapons. The door creaked open and slowly we walked in. There was no one inside. Besides old rusty farm equipment, we noticed a couple of strange items scattered around the floor. The first thing we saw was a brass cow figurine. Second, we found a Bible with burn marks all over it. We later learned the entire book of Leviticus had been torn out. Helen adamantly swore she had no idea who the items belonged to or why they were in that shed. The whole thing was very overwhelming for her. We brought the items to the station but nothing ever surfaced. That was the last clown sighting. Maybe it was a series of pranks, an odd fad that came and went. Whatever the case, it all sticks out to me as something incredibly strange. I always feel uneasy whenever I think about those events. My friend is a police officer, so this one's from him. His partner and him responded to a call about a senior citizen wandering around a walkway between apartments in the middle of the night. They both went down and found the old man looking disoriented. They asked him standard questions like what was his name, what was he doing there etc. But the old man just responded in gibberish. He managed to produce his ID though, so they called HQ to check on his particulars. HQ said that this old man was deceased. My friend had turned around to make the call while his partner still faced the old man, but had his eyes on my partner. The moment they heard the news, they turned to look at the old man, but he had disappeared. His son had filed a lost report on his dad's ID, and it was last reported to be in this location, even though they lived in another part of town. 911 operator here. I've told this story before, but the first overdose call I took after I finished up my training stuck with me for a long time. There was a house full of people high as a kite on a whole slew of stuff, and one guy odds on heroin. So they call 911, and I'm walking them through stuff while my officers and M's are on the way. Mind you, this whole time I can hear the agonal breathing in the background and everyone else in the room going batshit crazy, understandably as their friend is dying in front of them. So I'm trying to walk them through my emergency medical dispatch steps, and not a single person in the room is coherent or calm enough to be of any help. All of this, while they lie about what he was nodding on, making it take more time for Narcan to be administered, as my officers didn't know it was Herian until a few minutes after they arrived. The subject lived, so it all turned out well. The next one is Nia. A few months ago I took a rape call, and that one was the toughest emotionally so far. This girl, who was young, I think 20, but I can't remember, calls in and is just broken on the phone. She's not crying anymore, but you can tell she had been. The poor girl had been out for a run on our trails and some guy jumped out and pinned her down and raped her. As if that wasn't bad enough, she was a virgin. Fortunately we ended up catching the guy about a month later. Investigative work takes forever after my detectives combed through thousands of hours of video footage in order to find his home and ID him.